The snow that morning wasn't beautiful. It was violent, wet, mean, the kind that wanted to hurt you. It melted the second it touched skin, but clung to everything else like it had nowhere else to go. Her boots sank deep into mud that hadn't frozen yet, just gone bitter and soft, like the ground itself couldn't decide what to be. Around her, the town looked dead. No smoke from chimneys, no faces in windows. Just wind rattling through an old corral and a forgotten shutter banging somewhere in the distance. She leaned against a fence rail, one hand pressed hard across her belly, trying to stop the pain. Or maybe the memory. Honestly, she didn't know which hurt more anymore. Her coat didn't fit. The buttons wouldn't reach across her middle. She'd stitched extra fabric in herself, but the wind still found every seam. The wind always did. Down the street, a painted sign swung half-broken over a shuttered storefront. Mercantile and oddments. She stared at it like it owed her something. In her coat pocket she had one thing left, a single silver coin, smooth and heavy, the kind men lost to whiskey and bad decisions. She touched it constantly, not for luck, but to prove she hadn't lost absolutely everything. Not yet. Her fingers trembled as she walked. Each step felt longer than the last. She passed the old saloon where music used to leak out like sin and comfort. Now the porch sagged, and the piano behind broken glass sat silent under a thick layer of dust. That's when she saw him. Out back behind the stables, tied to a post like some carnival leftover nobody wanted, the giant cowboy. Flesh and blood, they said, though he didn't move when snow piled on his shoulders or when birds landed on his hat. Some said he was a carnival cast off. Others said he was a debt nobody wanted to collect. He just stood there, day after day, blank-eyed and motionless, boots buried in straw and mud, waiting like a ghost for permission to leave. She stared at him the way you stare into a mirror no one else can see. His arms were thick as fence posts, chest like a boulder, mouth slack. But his eyes were soft, like he'd once known kindness, but forgotten how it felt. A sign hung around his neck on rusted wire. For sale, 1 coin, as is, no returns. She didn't laugh, didn't smile, just looked at that giant like he might understand something everyone else had missed. For a second she thought about what else that coin could buy. Bread, train fare, one night in a real bed where nobody called her poor thing or trouble. But all of that felt temporary, fleeting, like warmth borrowed from someone else's fire. She stepped closer. The snow stung her cheeks, but she didn't flinch. She pressed the coin into his chest like an offering. It clinked against the buckle on his coat and fell into the straw. Nothing happened, no spark, no magic, just silence. Then barely, a breath. A twitch of one thick finger, slow as spring thaw. His eyes blinked once, then again, like waking from a sleep too deep to name. She didn't move, just watched. He looked at her the way wounded things do, not afraid, but unsure if they're still part of the world. "I bought you," she said, voice ragged. His throat worked, dry and rusted. He nodded once, and just like that, they stood there in the falling snow, two lost things with no direction left except toward each other. The giant didn't speak that first day, not one word. He followed her with the slowness of a storm rolling over plains, inevitable, wordless, immense. His boots left holes in the snow that filled in seconds. She kept glancing back, half expecting he'd vanish like everything else she'd ever tried to hold. They made it as far as the old church before she gave out. The doors hung crooked, windows busted. Inside, the pews were warped with age and weather, but the roof mostly held, a place forgotten by everyone but the wind. She collapsed onto the first bench, panting like a horse run too hard. Her hands clutched the swell of her belly, not protectively, more like surrender. The giant stood in the doorway, snow falling from his shoulders like dust shaken off an old coat. He ducked low to enter, then settled in the corner near the altar, as if unsure he belonged even there. She pulled a threadbare blanket from her pack, wrapped it around herself, and sat silent for a while, watching him through the dark. "You got a name?" she finally asked. His mouth opened, then closed. Jaw clenched, then, rough and low, "Number?" "Me neither," she said. Not a lie. The wind howled through a crack in the wall like a child mourning. She shifted, bones aching, and let her head fall back against the pew. Pain pulsed through her lower back now, sharp, rhythmic. She knew what it meant. Not today, she thought. Not yet. But sleep didn't come. Instead, the past crawled in. Once there had been a cabin, cottonwood trees out front. A man with a smile that turned cruel fast when no one was looking. She remembered the way he held her hand at the wedding, and the way he hit it against the wall 3 weeks later. She remembered hoping for change, praying for silence, and finally praying he'd just go. And he did. Took the horse, took the money, left a note that said, "It ain't mine, but good luck." She'd walked 3 days to the last place she'd heard her sister lived. But the house was burned out. Nothing but black beams and ash. Since then, it had been fences, hunger, bad coffee, and one hand pressed to her stomach like that might be enough to keep them both alive. The giant stirred, shifting his weight. His eyes never left her, not once. "You going to run off?" she asked. He shook his head. "You sure? That sign said no returns." He tilted his head, the movement almost childlike. Then he spoke again, voice thick with disuse. "Don't got nowhere else." She nodded like that made sense, like that was a kind of promise. Outside, the wind died down. Snowflakes drifted soft and slow. The world went quiet, hushed and waiting. She leaned forward, elbows on knees, stared at the empty altar. "Why'd they sell you?" His answer came slow. "Didn't fight back when I was supposed to." A silence stretched between them, thin and taut. "That's not a sin," she said. He didn't reply, just looked down at his hands. Big hands, calloused, like they remembered work that hurt. She shifted, pain biting her again. He noticed, sat up straighter. She waved him off. "Not yet. Maybe tomorrow." He nodded, but the look in his eyes said he knew better. By morning, the pain was worse, deeper, rhythmic, like thunder echoing through her spine. She didn't scream. Screaming wouldn't help. Instead, she bit down on the corner of the blanket and let it muffle the sounds of her body breaking itself open. The giant didn't flinch. He knelt beside her in the broken pews, moved slow like someone handling glass. He didn't ask what to do, just watched her with a kind of reverence, waiting for instruction that never came. She was soaked through, sweat, blood, snow melt. Hair clinging to her face in damp, feral curls. Her hands clawed at the old floorboards, nails split. Every breath came with a groan. "Water," she rasped. He moved silent as a shadow. Found a pew leg, broke it clean, went outside. She didn't know how long he was gone. Time had folded in on itself. But he came back with a battered tin bucket full of melted snow, lined with strips he'd torn from the blanket. She gripped his arm once, hard, eyes wild. "If it's a boy." She choked on the rest. The light outside turned the color of bruised peaches, pink and blue and dying gold. Birds didn't sing. Nothing did. Just the sound of her breathing and the creak of her hips opening under the weight of life coming through. The child came just before dusk. Quiet. Still. Too quiet. She didn't move, just stared, hollowed out. The giant wrapped the baby in the last clean cloth, held it like something fragile and holy. He crouched next to her, face unreadable. She reached for the child with trembling hands. Then, sudden, sharp, a sound. A wail, wet and thin, but real. She didn't cry, not then. Just closed her eyes and let her forehead touch the floor. The giant passed her the child. She cradled it against her chest. A girl, small, scrappy, fists clenched like she'd already learned to fight. "She's alive," the woman whispered, like she didn't quite believe it. The giant sat back, his enormous frame sinking against the altar. Snow drifted through a gap in the ceiling, soft flakes landing on the floor between them. "You got a name now," she murmured to the girl. "You're mine. That's enough." The baby nestled closer, tiny breaths warming the woman's skin. The pain was still there, sharp and constant, but something else rose beneath it. Not peace exactly, but something that could become peace if given time. The woman looked up at the giant. "You still don't want to run?" He shook his head once. "Good," she said, voice barely audible. Didn't want to be alone anymore. Neither of them smiled, but something passed between them, mutual and slow. The recognition of another soul, stitched together by scar tissue. Outside, the wind shifted, and for the first time in weeks, it didn't sound like grief. They stayed in the church. No one came to run them out, and the roof mostly held. Snow piled against the windows. The world outside shrank down to firelight and the sound of an infant learning to breathe steady. The giant patched walls with planks torn from the last pews. He slept near the altar, never asking for the warmer corner. She didn't tell him what to do, and he never asked. He moved with purpose, hands slow but sure, chopping wood, fixing hinges, carrying water from the well behind the graveyard where the stones had no names. She watched him when he thought she wasn't looking. Saw how he handled silence like it was a tool, not a burden. Sometimes he stared out the door too long, not blinking, like maybe something out there still held him. Or maybe nothing did. The baby cried loud those first days. Hungry all the time, but strong. Stronger than she should have been. The woman nursed her beneath the tattered blanket, body shaking with exhaustion, lips cracked from thirst. Still, she didn't complain. Not once. Not when the fever took her for a night, burning behind her eyes. Not when her legs gave out trying to cross the room. Not when her stitches tore and bled. The giant brought her firewood and water. A stone he warmed in the coals to place beneath her back. When the baby cried, he rocked her with arms that could break bones but held like cradles. Sometimes when the woman slept shallow, half ready to wake, she heard him humming just under his breath, a broken tune with no words. She never asked what it was, and he never explained. One night, after the wind calmed and the baby slept sound in her arms, she looked at the man across the room and said, "I think I was meant to die in this place." He didn't flinch, just looked at her like the idea wasn't so strange. "I didn't," she added, "but it would have been easier." He said nothing. She turned her head, looked at the fire. "Why didn't you fight back?" He sat quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, low, "It wasn't worth the killing." "Not then," she pressed. "But now." He looked at the child, then at her, and something shifted in his face. Not hardness, just a new edge of clarity. "Now I might." She nodded. That was the only warning she ever needed. One morning, near the end of January, tracks appeared in the snow outside. Wagon ruts, hoof prints, more than one horse. She saw them first, holding the baby at the doorway. The air was cold, flat. No birds. She didn't speak, just stared at the horizon, teeth grinding. He joined her at the door, saw the same. "Someone's coming," she said. He nodded. She didn't ask if he was ready. He didn't need to say he was. They came near dusk, 3 men on horseback, faces wrapped in cloth, rifles slung lazy across their laps like they meant nothing. The wagon behind them creaked under weight the snow couldn't hide. Barrels, sacks, maybe more. The woman stood just outside the church, baby against her chest in a sling made from her old dress. Her coat hung open, no weapon visible. The giant stood a few paces behind her, arms crossed, not hiding, not welcoming. Just there, like a mountain too big to move. The lead rider raised a hand. "Ain't looking for trouble." She didn't answer. He tried a smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "Just passing through, cold as hell. Thought maybe someone inside might be neighborly." The word tasted wrong in his mouth. She shifted the baby slightly, eyes never leaving his face. "Ain't no neighbors left." He looked past her, at the church, at the giant. The smile faded. "Big man," he muttered. No one replied. Another rider dismounted, boots crunching on crusted snow. "That the one from Black Mule?" he asked, pointing with his chin. "The cowboy they used to bring out for money fights." "Didn't think he was real," the first man muttered. "Everything's real," she said. "You just don't always get to keep it." The third rider stepped down. Younger, nervous. His hand drifted near his rifle. That's when the giant moved, just one step forward. But it changed the air. Still no weapon, but it was like a sound dropped out of the world. The leader held out his hand. "Calm now, easy. No need to square off. We got food, trade, just cold and tired." The woman looked at their boots. None of them showed frostbite. Their coats weren't wet. The wagon carried too much for travelers. "You've been raiding," she said flatly. No one answered. She stared at the horses, sturdy, too clean. "You took those too." "Survival," the leader said. "Same as you." She glanced back at the church, the broken roof, the patched walls, the firewood stacked like bones. "This ain't the same," she said. The younger one stepped forward. "Lady, we don't want—" The giant moved again. This time it was fast. He was on the young one before the others could blink, one massive hand around the rifle barrel, snapping it like kindling. The boy stumbled back, white with fear. The leader raised his rifle but didn't fire. "We don't want blood." "You already spilled it," the woman said. "Just not here." They left slow, hands raised, eyes locked on the man who'd come alive for the first time in years. No words, no threats, just fear. When the sound of hooves vanished down the slope, the giant turned back to her. "You going to ask why I didn't kill them?" he said. She shook her head. "You didn't need to." He looked at the child, then at her. "Would have, though." She nodded. "I know." That night they sat by the fire, the child between them. She slept with her mouth open, arms splayed, dreaming whatever babies dream. The church held its silence, but it felt different now. Less empty, like something new had entered. Not hope, not yet. But the space where hope might grow. She didn't speak, neither did he. They just sat there, warm in the half-ruin of a dead man's house, and watched the flames. By February, the snows thinned. The road hardened again, no longer a grave, but a path. Icicles dripped from the eaves in slow, steady rhythm, like the land itself was learning how to breathe. After months of holding still, the child grew louder, more insistent. Her fists flailed when she was hungry. Her cries turned from weak whistles to something stronger, sharper, alive. The woman wore dark crescents under her eyes, but smiled more now, not wide, not often, just enough to be real. The giant repaired the bell tower, though no one asked him to. Hauled beams up on his back, worked by instinct and feel. Once the woman found him on the roof, bareheaded in the wind, hammer in hand. She stood below and didn't call to him, just watched. He looked more like himself up there, or less like someone else's ghost. When he came down, she asked, "You remember where you're from?" He shook his head. "Family." Another pause. Then, "Maybe once." She didn't press. She knew how memory could rot in the corners, how it came back in colors and smells, but not names. That evening she placed her last candle on the altar, lit it, and let it burn. The flame flickered in the draft, stubborn. She stared at it a long time, then said softly, "I had a sister once. She ran away before I did. Said she'd send word when she was safe." The giant stood by the window, looking out. "She never did," the woman continued. "Found her name on a ledger in a boarding house, then a grave not far after, just her first name, misspelled." She rocked the child gently, pressing her lips to the soft hair. "I buried her right outside, made her a marker from a pew board. I think that's the last time I cried." He turned to her, slow. "You just forgot how. Doesn't mean it's gone." She looked up. "You speak like a man who knows grief." "I do." She nodded once. That was enough. One night, a storm rolled in. Thunder low and distant, the kind of storm that waited. The giant stood outside long after dark, watching the sky light up over the ridgeline. She joined him, wrapped in the patched coat, the child pressed to her chest. "She's stronger than I thought she'd be," she murmured. "She's yours," he said. The words landed heavy, without decoration. They stood there for a long time, wind in their hair, boots sunk in soft mud. No one moved. Then she said, "You could go." He didn't answer. "You're not mine," she added. He looked at her, eyes lit by lightning far off. "Ain't got anywhere better to be." Silence again. Then she said it, low, barely audible. "I don't want to do this alone." He nodded. "Just once, you won't." Spring came slow, crocuses pushing up beside the graves. Birds returned in fits. Water trickled under the church floorboards, a sound like whispering feet. The baby began to smile. The woman started to hum again, the tune broken and half-remembered. And the giant built a fence, post by post, around the place they hadn't named, but which had started to feel like home. The fence rose slow, honest work. Cedar posts driven deep, crossbeams hand-cut, lashed with wire where the wood wouldn't hold. The giant worked in silence, sleeves rolled, arms dark with sun and effort. Sometimes the baby sat in a feed crate, watching him like he was a storm come to life. Sometimes she shrieked with joy when he lifted her high, higher than any tree. The woman planted seed where the old cemetery ran out. Beans, squash, a few carrots. Not much, but enough to say she believed in months to come. Her hands were cracked from cold and soil, fingernails rimmed with dirt. She never spoke of the child's father again, never needed to. Her silence was louder than history. They found a dog half-starved in the brush one morning. Rib-thin and skittish, it bared its teeth until the giant sat down on the grass and didn't move. Hours passed. When the sun set, the dog came close enough to lick his hand. It stayed after that, always close to the door, but never inside. The woman named it Hollow. The giant didn't ask why. One afternoon, she came in from the fence line, wind in her hair, blood in her boots. A rusty nail had gone straight through the sole. She bit down hard when the giant pulled it free, face pale, jaw tight. He boiled water, tore cloth from his old coat, bandaged her clean. When it was done, she said, "Thank you," soft as breath. He said, "You do the same." She didn't answer, but he was right. That night, with the baby asleep between them on the pew bench, she asked, "Do you think she'll remember this place?" He looked at the flickering fire, eyes hollowed with thought. "She'll remember warmth," he said, "and hands that held her." "Not the ruin?" she asked. He shook his head. "Kids forget ruin. Grown folks carry it." She leaned back, stared at the ceiling where the wind whispered through beams. "I want her to know softness." "She will." "You really believe that?" He didn't speak right away. "I believe in the chance," he said. The first green came early May, a single vine curling up a split rail post. It made her cry. Quiet, quick tears she wiped away before the baby saw. The soil had taken what she gave it. That was enough. He built a crib from scrap wood and leather straps, rough but strong. She ran her hand along the edge of it, reverent. "You ever built one before?" she asked. He shook his head. "You did good." The giant said nothing, but when he thought she wasn't looking, he touched the corner of the crib like it might vanish. By summer, the church had changed. The light hit the windows different. The grave markers no longer felt like gravestones, but like names in a story someone still read. The woman sang more. The baby laughed more. And the giant, he began to smile. Just once in a while. Always small, always like he wasn't sure he had the right. But he did. The road never vanished. It just faded, ruts softened by grass, dust settled into quiet. But it was always there, winding out toward what they couldn't see. Some days the woman stood at its edge, baby on her hip, staring like the horizon might speak. Someone could come, she'd say. Not fearful, not hopeful, just stating fact. The giant would nod. Then we'll see who they are. Late one evening, thunder again, far off but steady, not the sky kind, the hoofbeat kind, measured, slow. They had a system by then. He took the girl, held her close to his chest. The woman lit no lamps, moved quiet, waited. One rider. A lone figure on a bay gelding, dusted head to toe in trail grime. Rifle slung high but untouched. The rider stopped outside the fence, dismounted without a word. The woman stepped forward, hand on the small of her back where a knife rested. The rider tipped back a wide-brimmed hat. A woman, older, leathered by sun and time, eyes sharp as flint. "Been looking a long time," the stranger said. No one answered. She looked past them, at the child, at the church, at the field of markers. Then back to the woman. "You the one who kept her alive?" Still silence. "I knew her mama," the stranger said, voice gentling. "Back when she used to sing." The woman swallowed. Her shoulders didn't drop, but something in her shifted. "She yours now?" the rider asked. The woman nodded. The rider smiled, slow. "Good. I just needed to know. Make peace." She turned to leave. "You want to come in?" the woman asked. The rider paused. "Not today, but thank you." She mounted again, touched two fingers to her brim in farewell, then rode off into the blue dusk. After, the giant sat carving something from an old fence rail. The woman watched him for a while, then said, "You think people can change?" He didn't look up. "They can if they want to." "You think we have?" He set down the carving, a small horse, rough and crooked. He passed it to the baby, who immediately tried to eat it. He met her eyes. "We ain't the same." She laughed once, dry and soft. "No," she said. "We're not." Late that night, a warm breeze moved through the broken window like a sigh. The baby stirred, then settled. The woman stood at the doorway again, bare feet on cool wood, watching the wind roll through the grass. The stars were bright, scattered like bones. Behind her, the giant slept, sitting up, head bowed, a hand resting near the crib. She looked back at them, at what they had made out of ruin. But here's the thing nobody tells you about survival. It doesn't end. Not cleanly. Not with a bow. You just keep going, day after day. until one morning you realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're living, and that's harder. Because living means hoping, and hope is the most dangerous thing of all. The candle on the altar guttered out at last. Smoke curled to the ceiling like a prayer no one would hear. But maybe that's okay. Maybe prayers aren't meant to be heard. Maybe they're just meant to be said. If this story moved you, if you felt something for the woman who bought a giant with her last coin, for the man who learned to fight again, for the child born in a ruined church, then don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to remember that even broken things can build something beautiful. Because that's what stories do. They remind us we're not alone in the ruin. And sometimes that's enough.